Chapter 148. Shizun is a natural tease. Moran was caught flat-footed. He hadn't expected Wanning to come swinging at him and narrowly dodged the tip of the sword as it brushed past his chest. "If Shizun wants to spar with me, at least try on the clothes first. Uncle is still waiting to hear back." "Spar first, clothes after." "This is kinda urgent. The tailor is waiting to make adjustments if anything doesn't fit." "Come at me then." Moran was rendered speechless. This was a quality Wanning shared with Shizun. Once they became competitive, it was hard to talk them down. In the course of this short exchange, Wanning's longsword had already struck at Moran's vital points several times. Moran only managed to emerge unscathed by virtue of his extensive training. Had he been a second slower, he might have been wounded, and his clothes would have been ruined either way. The sword came down on Moran's shoulder, but Wanning managed to hold back and merely struck him with the flat end of the blade. He sneered in cold challenge. "Mozongsche, is that the best you've got?" Cornered like this, unable to do so much as put aside the clothes in his arms, Moran smiled ruefully. "Shizun's done going easy on me and wants to bully me instead?" Wanning's gaze was sharp as the blade, and his sword-like brows drew together slightly. "Did you think I would go easy on you forever?" "Huh, that's true." "Well, are we doing this or not?" Okay, let's spar. Smiling, Moran shook his head. A light flared at the tip of his fingers. "Jangui, come." Jangui answered the call, but since Wanning was wielding an ordinary blade, Moran didn't inject any spiritual energy. His hand had barely closed around the willow vine when the sword thrust toward him again. Moran jumped a few steps backward and flicked the willow whip, which wrapped around the hilt of Wanning's sword. Unfazed, Wanning effortlessly tucked the hilt free with a twist of his wrist. He darted behind Moran, devilishly fast, and held his blade to Moran's throat. Pressed against Moran's back, he said somewhat gloomily, "You weren't concentrating. Again." Wanning's breath brushed soft and warm against Moran's ear, sending heat surging through him. His throat bobbed beneath the sword's edge as he chuckled and said, voice low, "Shizun, don't be so quick to judge. Look closer and see for yourself if I was concentrating or not." At this, Wanning realized with a shock that Moran's willow vine had somehow wrapped itself around his arm, firmly restraining him. He was unable to move an inch. Wanning eyed his arm for a long moment, his eyes lit with a keen flash. Not bad. I take it back." Moran grinned. "No take-backs." "What do you want then?" "I want Shizun to try on the clothes." Wanning humphed. "Let's see who wins first." As he spoke, he channeled a powerful jolt of spiritual energy through his right arm, throwing Jiangui off. He leapt back, putting distance between himself and Moran, as his sword flashed through the air toward its target. Moran had no choice but to raise his whip to meet the attack. The willow vine and sword clashed in the air. Neither weapon was infused with spiritual energy, so there was none of the usual spectacle of fiery sparks. Nevertheless, every blow was immensely skilled, fluid, and precise. One of Moran's arms was still occupied with the clothes meant for Wanning, so Wanning limited himself to using his right hand to spar. In the blink of an eye, the two exchanged 100-odd blows and fought to a stalemate, surprisingly evenly matched. Wanning's breath came fast and heavy, and a hot line of sweat ran down his sharp, night-black brows, snaking straight toward his eye. Fixated on his match with Moran, he couldn't spare it attention. That droplet of sweat fell past his lashes and straight into his eye. He endured it without blinking, his eyes lit with a terrifying brightness, blazing in the night sky. The Baidu Immortal's combative nature had been thoroughly stirred by his own disciple. He'd always enjoyed the heat of the competition, a good, hearty fight. His usual coldness and aloofness in battle were only because he rarely met a good match. But Moran was like a torch, igniting the pool of heady liquor that was Wanning into a roaring blaze, setting the skies alight. As the fight progressed, the longsword, unable to withstand the force of their strikes, creaked ominously. Finally, as they clashed in midair once more, it gave one last keen and shattered into countless glittering fragments between the two great zongshes. "Even the sword is broken now," Moran said helplessly. "Do you still want to keep going?" Wanning tossed the hilt aside, eyes ablaze with the rush of battle. The collar of his white robes hung loose, drawing the eye to his tall, slim form. He replied simply, "Yes." Before the stunned Moran could recall Jiang Gui, Wanning was lunging at him. He sprang forth like an arrow released from a fully drawn crossbow, like a cheetah in the wild, like a falcon in the snow. Moran scrambled to dismiss Jiang Gui, then raised his arms to block as the two changed tactics and moved into close, vigorous combat. Hand-to-hand combat was different from sparring with weapons. The one with the larger build had the easy advantage. Wanning and Moran were evenly matched in skill, but Wanning was at a clear disadvantage this time around. Moran grinned. "Shizun, let's stop here. Without using spiritual powers, honestly, you don't stand a chance." Wanning snapped in fury. "How dare you, insolent disciple!" Okay. How about this? Since Shizun's mad, I'll let Shizun make the first 10 moves. "No way, you!" Enraged by this humiliation, Wanning's punches and kicks became faster and more vicious. High-tongued petals swirled around them like a flurry of snowflakes. There, under the tree, master and disciple exchanged relentless blows with all their strength. After another 80 exchanges, Wanning found himself flagging. He'd been practicing with the sword for about an hour before Moran's arrival. Then they'd traded over 100 blows with their weapons. He really was beginning to tire. Yet his eyes were bright and his heart was racing. His handsome face was aglow with vitality. The longer they fought, the more entangled they became, locked even tighter in their struggle for dominance. Wanning twisted sharply, elbow jabbing straight for Moran's ribs, only to find his arm caught in Moran's grasp. They strained against each other, their arms shaking with exertion. Wanning's arms were held fast in Moran's grip, the strength in those long, calloused fingers threatening to crush him down, break his bones. Moran's primal thirst to dominate stirred at their close contact tussle. With a burst of strength, he finally overpowered Wanning, and then suddenly, with a twist of his arm, Wanning jerked in shock, but before he knew it, he was firmly restrained in Moran's sweat-damp embrace. "Still want to keep going?" The voice coming from behind him clearly carried a smile. Wanning, heart thumping, could feel Moran's broad chest flush against his back. That chest was like fire, searing hot, and as firm as iron. It was like molten lava, threatening to engulf him whole and melt him down. Moran's lips were pressed to the back of Wanning's ear, and his hot breath puffed over the bare skin of Wanning's nape. With his hair up, there was nothing to shield Wanning from the sensation, from that intimidating, predatory breath, that masculine breath that threatened to tear him apart. Within their hot, dripping sweat and their physicality, there was the stickiness of limbs entangled, wet as lust. "Shizun, still want to keep going?" Wanning didn't answer. He bit down hard on his bottom lip, and the corners of his phoenix eyes began to redden. Fuck, no way was he going to yield. Just as he was about to wrestle free, Moran's lips moved, brushing across his earlobe in seeming coincidence. Wanning's hair stood on end at the hot, rough sensation, skin prickling into goosebumps, and he ground out through clenched teeth. "Let go." Despite his sharp words, his body trembled, softly and uncontrollably in Moran's arms. How lucky that Moran was tired from all the exertion and couldn't tell why he was shaking. The truth was, Moran was barely keeping himself in check and had no capacity to notice aught amiss with Wanning. Wanning heard Moran tease in a low, husky voice, in tones one would hear in the thick of desire. If I let go, will Shizun finally go change? His phoenix eyes reddened at this provocation. He said sharply, "Let go!" But his attempt to break away only made Moran tighten his grip, so rough and assertive that Wanning's arm was nearly dislocated. His body went pliant, and despite himself, he let out a hoarse, muted groan. The sound was too like a moan of the erotic variety. Moran froze, his lower body immediately answering its call. The bodies were still pressed closely together, and, petrified that his Shizun would notice the hot and hard arousal pushing against him, Moran instinctively shoved Wanning away, no longer daring to restrain him as he had. The moment Moran let go, a blindingly furious Wanning spun around, clutching his aching arm, and delivered a vicious roundhouse kick with all his might. Caught completely off guard, Moran was sent sprawling. He hadn't at all anticipated such a kick, and lay on the ground in a daze. His ribs, he thought, were surely broken, and his brows were knit in pain. Shizun, that's not playing fair. But he didn't dare finish the thought, only straining to squint up at Wanning through watery eyes. He beheld his Shizun, robes in utter disarray. The white silk of Wanning's inner robes had been pulled open in a violent tussle, revealing a wide swath of chest, firm and smooth, rising and falling rapidly with his panting. Wanning yanked close the lapels of his robes as he struggled to catch his breath. Loose locks of hair framed his forehead and temples, and the corners of his eyes were yet tinged red from the exertion of their match. Wanning slowly straightened, then gave Moran an appraising look from on high. He lifted his chin slightly, and his gaze burned, imposing and proud. He inhaled deeply and said, "What does it matter if you're taller? You're still lost." Moran was caught between laughter and tears. When he spoke, blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "You don't say. I think my bones are broken." Wanning fell into a guilty silence. He'd been so absorbed in the fight that he didn't know if he'd held back with that last kick. He bent to prod at Moran's ribs, asking, "Where did I kick you?" "Here." "Does it hurt?" Moran looked up helplessly. Of course it hurt. But he was no longer a teenager, and was definitely not about to cry about a boo-boo to his Shizun. When he saw Moran's pale face, Wanning reached out to take the pile of clothes from him with one hand and extended the other to pull him up. He didn't realize how much the sparring had taken out of him, and Moran was tall and strapping to boot. Not only did he fail in his attempt to pull Moran to his feet, he lost his balance and fell right on top of Moran. At the pained groan of the man beneath him, Wanning scrambled upright and began checking him over without thinking. "Are you all right?" he asked, face-stricken. Moran had one arm thrown over his eyes, and his brows were drawn. "Can you get off me first?" "Oh, good. He can still talk. Looks like I didn't crush him to death." He tried to rise, but once a person exhausted their strength, it wasn't easy to get back up after a fall. His legs wobbled, and he ended up collapsing again. It was a sorry state of affairs. Alas, this time he tumbled directly onto Moran's hips. He noticed nothing untoward at first, but Wanning was currently wearing very little, no more than one thin silken layer, and this position was rather awkward. The instant he moved, he felt something hard and huge and at the ready beneath him.